Welcome, dear listener, to Go to Sleep Historia. Tonight, we drift through a hidden corridor of sound, the forgotten world of elevator music, and the quiet geniuses who shaped the dreams of modern calm. Close your eyes and imagine the gentle hum of a lobby, the faint melody in a waiting room, the soft echo that fills the spaces between moments. Behind those tones lie stories of composers who worked not for fame, but for peace. Settle in, breathe softly, and let this tale guide you through the history of ambient dreams. A slow journey through sound, silence, and the art of tranquility. If you're visiting for the first time, we kindly invite you to subscribe, like, and comment to support our growing library of calm histories. Now, let the story begin. Close your eyes for a moment. Listen, not to the obvious, not to the chatter of the day or the hum of your thoughts, but to what rests beneath it all. Somewhere in the background, a quiet melody might be playing. Soft strings, a tender piano, perhaps a gentle swell of electronic air, drifting without direction. You may not have noticed it before, yet it's there, the hum beneath your life. Everywhere we go, it waits for us. In elevators, lobbies, shopping aisles, cafes, and waiting rooms. The music that greets us isn't meant to be heard, not truly. It asks for no applause, expects no attention. Its purpose is different. It seeks to soothe, to fill the empty air that silence leaves behind. But this gentle art, the quiet soundscape that guides us through public life, has a story, a hidden lineage stretching back a century, shaped by forgotten composers, scientists, and dreamers who saw music not as spectacle, but as atmosphere. Tonight, we will follow their traces. We will travel through the quiet corridors of history to find the invisible artists behind the world's most unnoticed sound. For most of us, this story begins in a place as unremarkable as the music itself. The elevator. That small, humming box suspended between floors became, quite by accident, the stage for an entirely new genre, a genre born not of passion or rebellion, but of function. Its purpose, to calm the nervous passenger, to fill the silence that once stretched awkwardly between strangers rising together through a tower of steel. It began simply enough. When skyscrapers first grew into the skyline, elevators were new, uncertain machines. People were uneasy. The thought of being lifted hundreds of feet by cables was too many, unsettling. Building owners discovered that if gentle music was played inside, passengers relaxed. The tunes gave the illusion of safety, of calm, a delicate rhythm for a mechanical world. And so, a strange idea took root, that sound itself could shape emotion, that by adjusting tempo, tone, and harmony, one could guide human feeling like a sculptor shaping clay. What began as an act of reassurance would soon evolve into a vast and invisible art form, one that wrapped itself quietly around modern life. We rarely notice how deeply we live inside this constant sound. It waits in the edges of our experience, in the dentist's office where fear softens under the hush of violins, in the cafe where chatter blends with slow jazz, in the shopping mall where a familiar melody encourages you to linger a little longer. These gentle orchestrations, often dismissed as dull or mechanical, are in truth the descendants of an idea that once seemed almost magical, that music could be useful. To understand the depth of this idea, we must first pause and truly listen. Think of a hotel lobby at dusk, soft light reflecting on polished marble floors, a few murmured voices drifting through the air, and beneath it, a slow melody. It doesn't tell a story. It doesn't rise or fall. It exists only to comfort. It gives shape to the silence, like the faint scent of lavender on linen. This kind of music, unassuming, gentle, and endlessly patient, is not accidental. It was composed this way, note by note, by people whose names history has nearly forgotten. They worked not for fame, but for harmony itself, crafting pieces meant to serve space and feeling, not ego or acclaim. For centuries, music was a form of expression of emotion, rebellion, celebration. But by the dawn of the 20th century, a few minds began to wonder. Could sound also be an instrument of order? Could it soothe the city's noise, make labor gentler, even make time pass more smoothly. The earliest traces of this thinking appeared in a new technological age, a time when electricity began to hum through walls, when machines found rhythm, and cities themselves began to pulse like living organisms. Amid this new mechanical music of progress, someone listened and imagined, perhaps the future needs a soundtrack. Something soft, something structured, something always there. And so, background music was born. The name that history remembers is Muzak. But before we reach that chapter, let us stay a moment in the feeling that came before the realization that silence in modern life had changed. In ancient temples, silence was sacred. In medieval monasteries, it was devotion. But in the age of machines, silence became awkward. In offices, factories, and elevators, silence was no longer a sign of peace. It was a reminder of tension, of emptiness, of waiting. Music filled that gap, like water poured into a vessel, reshaping the emotional landscape of modern existence. And as this transformation spread, something subtle happened. Music was no longer just performance. It became environment. It turned from story to space. The next time you step into an elevator or linger in a waiting room, try to listen again. Beneath the hum of machines and conversation, there is likely a quiet, looping melody. It was placed there for you not to entertain, but to cradle your attention, to ease your breathing, to remind your mind that everything is under control. We often think of art as something that demands to be seen or heard. But the composers of background music believed the opposite, that art could exist without being noticed, that beauty could live in plain sight, wrapped in repetition and simplicity. Their melodies did not seek applause. They sought balance. They created comfort without noise, emotion without demand. And in that quiet purpose, something profoundly human emerged. A reminder that sometimes the most meaningful creations are the ones that ask nothing of us. It simply exists to make the world feel softer. Tonight, as this story unfolds, we will meet the minds who shaped this invisible art, the inventors, the composers, the quiet geniuses who turned silence into music and music into calm. From the laboratories of early sound engineers to the serene vision of ambient composers, we will follow the thread of this gentle evolution. But for now, let your thoughts drift in the soft current of sound around you. Imagine the faintest echo of an elevator chime, the whisper of strings that fade before you can name them. That is where our story begins, in the unnoticed corners of the modern world, where music became air, and air became peace. This is the hidden world beneath your daily life, the sound you never hear, and yet it never stops playing. The birth of background, a dream of control history, has many loud moments, revolutions, symphonies, and shouts of discovery. But tonight, we turn to a quieter kind of invention, an idea that began not in the roar of an orchestra, but in the hum of a telephone wire. It was the early 20th century, and technology had begun to whisper in new ways. Electricity moved through cables. Voices traveled across oceans. And amid this growing web of invisible sound, one man began to dream of music that could move the same way, not through concert halls, but through buildings, wires, and the air itself. His name was Major General George Owen Squire, a soldier, scientist, and visionary. He was no musician, yet his invention would change the course of music forever. Squire believed sound could be transmitted like light, distributed gently through systems of wires, filling spaces with calm and control. What began as a technical experiment would soon become a cultural phenomenon. Muzak, to understand his dream. Picture America in the 1920s. The world was buzzing with invention: radios, telephones, electric lights, elevators, typewriters. The modern age was in full bloom, but with it came something new: noise. Cities clattered with machinery, offices hummed with conversation. The peace of the pre-industrial world seemed lost. Squire looked at this rising tide of sound and thought, what if it could be shaped? What if, instead of chaos, there could be harmony? He imagined a kind of background music that would not compete with the world's noise, but tame it. It would live quietly in the air, smoothing the rough edges of modern life. By 1934, his company began to deliver just that. Muzak, a name that blended music and Kodak, to suggest both art and precision, started transmitting soft orchestral arrangements to offices, restaurants, and eventually, elevators. For the first time in history, music was no longer tied to performance. It became functional, engineered, and everywhere. The early music catalog was filled with gentle melodies, light strings, slow brass, voices of calm. It was not meant to be listened to closely. It was meant to exist, to linger quietly, behind thought and action. Each piece was carefully arranged to avoid extremes. No sudden crescendos, no haunting sadness, no harrowing joy. It was emotional equilibrium, set to rhythm. Yet beneath this calm lay a deep scientific curiosity. The company worked with psychologists and behaviorists to study the effects of sound on human mood. They discovered that workers performed better when exposed to gentle, rhythmic patterns. Fatigue lessened. Focus improved. Anxiety, it seemed, could be lulled by harmony. Music soon became the soundtrack of factories and offices, an invisible companion to industry. They called their method stimulus progression. Music was programmed in blocks, each designed to subtly influence mood. The morning hours began with light, optimistic melodies, strings that lifted the spirit without demanding thought. As the day wore on, tempo and intensity increased slightly, maintaining energy through long hours of labor. Then, during lunch breaks, the music would fade into silence, allowing rest before the cycle resumed. It was a curious marriage of science and art. The first attempt to engineer emotion through controlled sound, the moderniers, but this might sound manipulative, even strange. But to those living through the mechanical pulse of the 20th century, it was comfort. It was an antidote to the sharp clatter of machines. For many, it was also progress itself. The promise that technology could not only build, but soothe. Music soon reached every corner of modern life. Department stores played it to make shoppers linger longer among the aisles. Hotels used it to ease travel-weary guests. Hospitals filled corridors with it to calm anxious hearts. Even military bases adopted it as soundtrack for discipline and morale. But not everyone loved it. Some critics called it soulless. They said it reduced art to utility, stripped music of meaning. Yet those who truly listened understood that it wasn't meant to replace art. It was meant to surround it. Music was not the song you remembered. It was the quiet space that allowed memory itself to rest. There's a certain poetry in that. For centuries, music had been tied to emotion, to joy, grief, love, or rebellion. But music created something entirely new. Emotion without story. A melody that existed not to be felt deeply, but to be felt gently. Imagine standing in a hotel lobby in 1940. A grand clock ticks softly above the front desk. The faint scent of polish lingers in the air. You hear it, a slow, shimmering tune drifting from hidden speakers. It's familiar, yet anonymous. Comforting, yet nameless. It does not demand your attention. It asks only that you feel at ease. That was the magic and mystery of Squire's creation. He had discovered the possibility of music as environment, but in his quiet revolution, something larger was born. The modern idea of ambient sound. Decades before electronic artists would speak of soundscapes or sonic textures, music engineers were already sculpting emotion through tone and timing. To many listeners today, the word music carries a faint smile, a reminder of bland tunes in waiting rooms. But behind that word lies a story of invention, philosophy, and a dream of control. A belief that if tuned just right, sound could create peace. Of course, not everyone agreed on what peace should sound like. As the 20th century unfolded, musicians and thinkers began to question whether sound should soothe or awaken. Out of those quiet debates would come the seeds of another revolution. One led not by engineers, but by composers. They would take the principles of music, its patience, its restraint, its gentleness, and reshape them into something new. A conscious art of stillness, of awareness. A form of music that invited the listener not to obey, but to drift. But before that awakening arrived, there was an era of anonymity. A time when hundreds of nameless composers filled miles of magnetic tape with melodies that no one could name, yet everyone heard. The architects of calm, the hidden craftsmen of mood, and it is to them that our next chapter belongs. For while George Squire built the system, others would fill it with sound. They were the silent architects of atmosphere, the forgotten artists who composed the world's background dreams. In the quiet rooms where Musak was born, there was no stage, no applause, no audience waiting in velvet seats. Only machinist paper, and the gentle patience of composers who wrote, not for fame, but for feeling. These were the architects of atmosphere, musicians who labored in the background of the background, crafting melodies designed to be invisible. Their work was precise, disciplined, and deeply human in its simplicity. They built the soundtrack of modern serenity, the hum of civilization made harmonious. Imagine stepping into one of their studios in the 1940s. It smells faintly of warm tape and polished brass. A low fluorescent light hums above, steady as a metronome. Sheets of handwritten music are stacked neatly on a wooden desk, each line filled with restrained beauty. A composer sits quietly before a piano, pressing soft chords, slow, major tones that fall like ripples across still water. He pauses often, not to admire, but to measure. Each note must blend seamlessly into the next. The melody must feel natural, like breathing. If it calls attention to itself, in one corner, a reel-to-reel recorder spins, whispering through the night. In another, a vibraphone glows faintly, its metal bars cooled by the air of the studio. The sound they're chasing is not dramatic or grand. It is balance, an exact harmony that soothes without stirring, calms without dulling. To achieve this, these musicians used the instruments of comfort. Strings played in unison rather than contrast. Flutes instead of trumpets. Brushes instead of sticks. They avoided sharp percussion, preferring the round warmth of muted brass and the shimmer of harp or celesta. Every sound was chosen for its gentleness, its ability to vanish the instant it arrived. Most of their names have faded from the record. The credits rarely appeared. But among the few who did emerge from the quiet, one was Raymond Scott, a restless innovator who built machines that could dream in melody. Scott's story is a bridge between Musaka's world of order and the coming wave of ambient experimentation. A jazz musician by training, he grew fascinated by electronics and the possibilities of automated sound. By the 1950s, he had built an entire laboratory devoted to what he called electronium music, compositions created by circuits rather than hands. He believed sound could be both organic and mechanical, both emotional and precise. His creations would hum and shimmer like the city itself, smooth, looping, endlessly patient. They were perfect for the age of elevators and television, when attention was a scarce and delicate thing. Others, too, worked quietly in this realm. There was Russell Vanderbilt, who arranged hundreds of anonymous orchestral tracks for Musak's mid-century catalog. His arrangements were like tiny architectures, measured in symmetry, guided by restraint. And Walter Wanderley, a Brazilian organist whose lilting melodies turned background sound into something tropical and alive. His music, though often misfiled under easy listening, carried the quiet joy of sunlight through curtains. Together, these figures and their many nameless peers built the emotional architecture of the 20th century's public spaces. Their compositions filled department stores, hotel corridors, office towers, and suburban kitchens. Theirs was the music that accompanied waiting for elevators, for doctors, for time itself to move. They composed to make silence comfortable, to make day, in between moments of life, less lonely. It was delicate work. Each piece had to be felt, but never heard. Too much melody, and the listener might become distracted. Too little, and the room would feel empty. The perfect composition hovered just at the edge of awareness, like perfume that fades before the nose can define it. Even the pacing of rhythm was scientific. The engineers of Musak insisted on precise beats per minute, calculated for the flow of human energy. Music, they believed, should follow the body's natural rhythm, heartbeat, breath, motion. It should whisper to the unconscious mind, "You are calm, you are steady, you are safe." In this way, music became architecture. Invisible walls of harmony held the world together. The architects of atmosphere didn't build towers or bridges. They built stillness. Yet their work carried an unexpected beauty. Though their compositions were crafted to fade, they often contained moments of accidental grace. A single chord that lingered like a sigh, or a harmony so pure it felt like light. The musicians themselves rarely heard their pieces again once recorded. They sent them into the world like anonymous letters, to no one in particular. But the world heard them in fragments, in elevators, in the hum of a quiet morning at work. And somewhere deep in memory, those notes took root. They became the sound of comfort, of waiting, of order, in an increasingly chaotic age. Some found the music too perfect, too emotionless. Writers in the 1950s mocked it as sonic wallpaper, the sound of conformity. But others began to sense something profound within its restraint. Beneath its composure lay a strange peace, a recognition that life didn't always need to shout to be beautiful. In those muted halls of sound, a new philosophy of music was forming. That beauty could exist in utility, that harmony could be gentle, not heroic, that a note could be valuable simply because it made the air softer. And slowly, as technology evolved, so did the possibilities. Magnetic tape replaced live orchestras. Synthetic tones emerged from early analog machines. Composers began layering sound like mist, shaping it as texture rather than melody. The line between noise and music blurred, and through that blur, something new began to glow. It was the faint light of what would later be called ambient music. But for now, in these mid-century studios, the future was only beginning to hum. The architects of atmosphere continued their quiet work, recording thousands of hours of music that would circle the globe, flowing through cables, into ceilings, into speakers, into the unnoticed corners of human experience. They didn't seek to move the listener's heart, only to guide it gently back to calm. Their art was the art of invisibility, and yet, in that invisibility, they shaped the feeling of a century. As the world moved faster, cars roaring, factories clanging, cities glowing with electricity, these unseen composers offered a soft reply. Their melodies became the breath between noises, the pause between thoughts, the subtle architecture of peace. The unheard artists in the quiet corridors of history. Fame travels loudly. But there are other paths, narrow, unlit, lined with the footsteps of those who worked not for glory, but for stillness. These are the unheard artists, the composers who created the invisible music of the modern world and then slipped back into silence. Their art was unlike any before it. For centuries, a composer's success was measured in applause. Concert halls, orchestras, and critics gave music its place in the world. But these new creators lived behind the curtain, producing sound that existed everywhere, yet belonged to no one. Their names rarely appeared on record sleeves or film credits. Their royalties were modest, their reputations faint, and still they worked hundreds of them, weaving the fabric of calm that settled over offices, lobbies, elevators, and waiting rooms. Imagine one such composer, a man named Harold St. James, a name you've never heard. He sits at a piano in 1958, late at night cigarette, burning low beside the keys. He plays not with passion, but with patience. His fingers trace slow chords, a soft waltz, just 3 notes turning over one another like waves. It's simple, perhaps too simple, but that's the point. His melody must not cling to the mind, it must drift through it. He records the piece on a reel of magnetic tape, labels it only Mood 27, a lively light afternoon, and sends it to the Musac library. From there, it will be copied, cataloged, and distributed to hundreds of locations across the country. The music will play quietly in supermarkets, helping shoppers feel at ease. It will accompany the hum of fluorescent lights in government offices, and it will drift, unnoticed, into millions of ears. Soothing, steady, anonymous. Harold never hears it again. This was the strange beauty of his profession. He composed not for himself, nor for recognition, but for the feeling that his music created in others, a piece he would never personally witness. His was an invisible legacy, scattered like dust through the air-conditioned spaces of modernity. There were hundreds like him, men and women trained in conservatories, often skilled enough for symphonic careers, who instead found steady work writing for the world's quietest orchestra. Each week, They were asked to produce mood pieces, short, wordless melodies designed to fit a schedule, an environment, a purpose. Some tracks were meant for Monday mornings, when workers were sluggish and needed a spark. Others for evening hours, to help minds unwind. Every piece was functional, precise, and timed to the rhythms of human behavior. And though critics mocked them as sound servants, these composers saw their work differently. They believed they were serving something pure. The emotional balance of daily life. A woman named Elena Brandt, once described her job in a rare interview. "I don't write songs. I build moods. The melody doesn't matter as much as the air it creates around it." Eleanor had studied classical piano before the war. When orchestras closed and concert work dwindled, she turned to studio, composing, writing dozens of cues from Muzak and radio libraries. Her touch was gentle, intuitive. She once said she imagined each piece as a window open to a spring afternoon. None of her music was ever released under her name, but her harmonies found their way into elevators across New York. Thousands of people heard her every day without knowing it. There's something quietly noble in that anonymity. These composers were builders of invisible beauty, the gardeners of mood, while the world around them grew louder. Rock bands, on radios, news broadcasts, traffic. They cultivated spaces of calm. Their work also reflected the ideals of the mid-20th century: efficiency, order, optimism. The melodies were designed to feel modern, but safe. Progress, but without the chaos. Every chord seemed to whisper reassurance. The world is changing, but everything is all right. Yet behind the smoothness, there was melancholy too. For some, the lack of recognition became a quiet ache. To spend a life creating music that no one remembers can be a strange kind of devotion, but others found freedom in it. Without fame, they were unburdened by ego or expectation. Their art became pure function, sound distilled to purpose, like water that simply flows. And in that purpose, they found peace. Still, even in this invisible craft, innovation was alive. Some composers began experimenting, layering natural sounds, imitating wind or rain, blending orchestral instruments with early synthesizers. They were quietly expanding the idea of background music, inching it closer to what would one day become the ambient art form. Among them was Raymond Scott, still tinkering with his electronic dreams. In a dim laboratory, surrounded by blinking lights and tangled wires, Scott built machines that could play endless loops of evolving sound. No two performances were ever quite the same. He imagined a world where background music wasn't just pre-recorded, it was alive, breathing, adapting to the mood of the room. His invention, the electronium, was decades ahead of its time, a precursor to the generative music algorithms that power today's ambient playlists. Scott's vision never became mainstream, but it whispered of the future, a future where sound would not only calm, but respond. Meanwhile, the more traditional composers continued to fill the world with their humble melodies. Their music became so common that people stopped hearing it altogether. The gentle strings, the warm brass, the brush of cymbals. They blended into architecture, into air. And maybe that's where they belonged. The unhurried artists gave something rare to the world, a sense of continuity. Their music didn't tell us stories. It told us that we were still here, that time was still flowing, that everything, for a moment, was steady. When you step into an elevator today and hear that faint wash of sound, you're listening to ghosts, the echoes of their devotion, the product of thousands of hours spent perfecting the art of being unnoticed. They were not forgotten because they were unimportant. They were forgotten because they succeeded. Their music became so natural, so seamless, that it disappeared into daily life. The highest compliment of all, in their quiet way, they achieved what so many artists never could. Permanence without presence, their work continues to hum beneath the world, steady and invisible, long after their names have faded. As we drift from this chapter into the next, imagine yourself in one of their spaces, a soft-lit lobby, the faint hum of conversation, the warmth of gentle sound wrapping around you. You may not know who composed the melody that plays, but they are with you still. The unheard artists, guiding your thoughts toward peace. A changing tune, from Muzak to mood. By the time the 1960s arrived, the world had changed its rhythm. Factories hummed, offices buzzed, Cities pulsed with electricity and speed, and somewhere beneath all that motion, still, steady, polite, played the music. Music. It was no longer just a curiosity. It was an empire of sound. Its melodies filled department stores, elevators, airports, and hotels. There was no corner of modern life left untouched by its gentle hum. Yet, as the decades turned, the world began to shift, and the music shifted with it. This is a story of that transformation. How the quiet science of functional sound slowly blossomed into a philosophy of feeling. How music became mood. The science of feeling. Musac's early decades were guided by precision. Its creators believed that music could shape behavior, that rhythm could steer emotion, and harmony could guide productivity. They called it the stimulus progression formula. Music was selected and arranged according to a 15-minute cycle. Soft tempos for calm, brighter tempos for energy, silence for focus. Factories reported increased output. Offices saw fewer complaints. Even hospitals noted calmer patients. It was an age that trusted science above all else, and music wrapped itself in that authority. It promised control, a way to manage the invisible tides of mood that flowed through every workspace and waiting room. But the world was changing, and with it, the ears of its listeners. As rock and roll erupted on radios and jazz musicians explored chaos and freedom, the notion of music as control began to feel old-fashioned. People wanted sound that spoke to emotion, not one that dictated it. And so, quietly, a transformation began. The rise of mood in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Composers within and beyond Musac's orbit started asking a daring question. What if background music could be more than invisible? What if it could become immersive? A kind of emotional landscape. Among those who asked was a generation of experimental musicians. They admired the calm of Musac, but sought to free it from its corporate leash. They wanted to turn the idea of functional music into something poetic, something that didn't just fill silence, but celebrated it. One of the first to make that leap was Brian Eno. After a car accident left him bedridden in 1975, Eno found himself listening to soft, nearly inaudible music playing in his hospital room. It mixed with the sound of rain and distant traffic until it became something else, something neither background nor foreground. That experience changed him. Eno later described this revelation as discovering a kind of sonic landscape, a world that could be entered, not merely heard. And from that discovery came a new term. Ambient music. He defined it like this. Ambient music must be able to accommodate many levels of listening attention without enforcing one in particular. It must be as ignorable as it is interesting. That sentence could have been written about music. But now, it had soul. The bridge between worlds, the bridge from music to ambient, wasn't built in rebellion. It was built in reflection. While Musac sought control, ambient sought peace. While one followed formula, the other embraced chance. Yet they shared a heart, the belief that sound could shape experience. The difference was intention. Musac was meant to guide behavior. Ambient was meant to guide being. You could say, music filled rooms. Ambient filled minds. But even before Eno gave it a name, echoes of ambient spirit had been forming. Raymond Scott, S. Electronic Experiments. Eleanor Brandt, Soft Window Melodies. Harold St. James, Patient Waltzes. All of them had laid the groundwork for a future where quiet music could be art. The corporate crescendo back in the world of commercial sound. Musac continued to thrive through the 70 segundos. Its library contained thousands of meticulously categorized tracks, each tagged with descriptors like bright, medium light, or neutral.com. Clients could order playlists the way one might order wallpaper. Something soothing for offices, please. A touch more cheerful for retail. But there was trouble in paradise. By the late 1970s, critics began to attack Musac as sterile and manipulative. The very symbol of modern conformity, pop culture turned it into a punchline. Elevator music became shorthand for boredom. Yet, even in that dismissal, something beautiful happened. People began to realize how deeply sound affected their perception. that the background had always been part of the story. And so, while the name Muzak faded, the idea behind it, curated calm, designed emotion, began to evolve. The philosophy of calm, Brian Eno's music for airports 1978 was, in a sense, Muzak reborn. It was written for space most people found stressful airport terminals and intended to transform anxiety into stillness. It used slow loops, long silences, and harmonies that seemed to breathe. It was not meant to distract passengers, nor to make them move faster, but to help them be. In Eno's words, it is designed to induce calm and a space to think. This was the moment when functional music became spiritual, when the goal shifted from productivity to peace. It was no longer about making people do something. It was about helping them feel. And in that shift, the quiet legacy of the elevator composers found new life. From soundtrack to soul, the following decades saw ambient music expand far beyond its roots. New technologies allowed composers to build infinite soundscapes music without beginning or end. Video games, meditation apps, and sleep playlists all owe a silent debt to those early pioneers. Even the soft music that guides millions to rest each night, the very heart of Go-to-Sleep Historian. S-World carries the DNA of Muzak. S for gato, dream. What began as a background became the foreground of inner peace, and perhaps that was always the destiny of this music, to remind us that silence and sound are not opposites, but partners. That peace does not come from absence, but from harmony. A world that listens again today. As people rediscover the beauty of stillness, the cycle completes itself. The same calm once piped through speakers in office ceilings now streams intentionally through headphones. What was once background noises, now called mindful sound. The composers who were ignored in their time now inspire millions seeking peace in a noisy world. The music never changed, only the way we listened to it. So, the next time you step into a quiet lobby or a softly humming train, listen closely. You might hear the ghost of a piano chord, the faint shimmer of strings, or a pattern of notes looping endlessly into calm. That's the sound of time itself, once Muzak. Now memory, whispering gently through your day. The age of ambient, when stillness became art, the world did not notice when it began to slow down. Somewhere in the middle of the 20th century's restless heartbeat, between the static of radios and the hum of fluorescent lights, music quietly changed direction. What was once built to accompany life, to decorate it, to guide it, begun to look inward. Out of the quiet corners of Muzak's invisible empire, a new kind of sound emerged. It was no longer meant to manage people, or to gently push them toward productivity. It was meant to hold them. The age of ambient had begun. It did not start with applause or headlines. It began in studios filled with machines that hummed like living things. It began with artists sitting in the half-dark, letting loops of sound fold in on themselves until time seemed to dissolve. These musicians were not chasing rhythm or fame. They were chasing space. They wanted to find the music that existed between thoughts, to tones that floated somewhere between silence and dreaming. One of them was Brian Eno. Lying in bed, unable to move much, he listened to a record playing too quietly to fill the room. At first, he tried to adjust the volume, but then he stopped. He began to notice how the faint notes mingled with the hum of rain outside, how the sound was not performing for him, but simply existing. It was a living texture, neither background nor foreground, something that asked nothing and gave everything. From that moment, Eno began to build a philosophy around this idea, giving it a name: ambient music. He described it as music that could be as ignorable as it was interesting. It did not demand attention, nor did it fade into emptiness. It lived in balance, creating an atmosphere that changed how a space felt rather than how it sounded. It was not for dancing or marching or performing. It was for being. Soon, other artists joined this quiet rebellion against the loudness of the age. Japanese composer Hiroshi Yoshimura painted soundscapes that seemed to breathe, each note dissolving like mist over water. Erik Wulo, from Norway, built glacial landscapes of tone, where music felt like light reflecting off ice. In Germany, Klaus Schulze and Tangerine Dream stretched sound into vast, hypnotic horizons, turning synthesis into meditation. And in America, Artists like Harold Budd began blending piano with silence itself, treating every pause as sacred space. Together, these composers gave the century something it didn't know it needed: stillness. The age of ambient was not about melody or harmony in the traditional sense. It was about presence. A piece might last 10 minutes, or an hour, or forever, unfolding so gradually that the listener lost track of beginnings and endings. It was music without plata, an ocean of tone in which one could simply drift. Listeners who had once dismissed background music as sterile now found themselves seeking these gentle soundscapes intentionally. Airports, galleries, and meditation rooms began to fill with soft drones and layered harmonies. Even hospitals and spas turned to ambient artists for sound that could ease the body's stress and slow the mind's racing clock. For the first time, sound became a form of therapy, a vessel for calm. What had begun as Musac's experiment in controlled emotion had become something freer, more spiritual. The same principles: gentle repetition, subtle modulation, familiar warmth were now used, not to influence behavior but to restore balance. The difference was purpose. The earlier composers had written for systems and schedules. The ambient artists wrote for souls. The technology of the time helped the movement grow. Synthesizers became more accessible, recording equipment smaller and more personal. Artists could now create infinite layers of texture from a single room, sculpting their own sonic universes. Tape loops spun endlessly, producing patterns that seemed to breathe. Computers later added new possibilities, allowing composers to design music that could evolve endlessly without ever repeating. The dream of Raymond Scott's Electronium, the self-generating machine that could compose by mood, had finally been realized, decades after he first imagined it. And yet, for all the technology, the music itself remained deeply human. Ambient art was never about machines replacing emotion. It was about rediscovering the quiet emotions that the modern world had buried under noise. Each sustained note was an invitation to slow down, to breathe, to listen not just to sound, but to silence. In that silence, people began to feel something ancient, an awareness of being alive, of time passing softly. The age of ambient was not merely an artistic movement. It was a cultural one. It reminded a generation that peace was not found in escape, but in stillness. The critics of the time were divided. Some dismissed ambient compositions as monotonous, meaningless, or indulgent. Others felt they were witnessing a rebirth of musical purpose. Eno himself once said that ambient music must be able to tint the atmosphere of a room, and that was precisely its quiet genius. It wasn't music you listened to. It was music you lived within. As the years passed, the influence of these soundscapes began to ripple outward. Film composers borrowed their textures to express memory and dream. Video game designers used ambient layers to build immersive worlds. Even popular musicians began to weave ambient sensibilities into their works off synthesizers, under pop songs, drones beneath rock ballads, delicate tones that made modern music breathe again. By the late 20th century, ambient music had become not just a genre, but a state of mind. It had left the elevator and entered the imagination. The forgotten art of background sound had become foreground philosophy. What was once dismissed as mechanical or boring now guided meditation, healing, and introspection. And somewhere, one imagines, the ghosts of the early Musac composers would have smiled. The soft waltzes of Harold St. James, the delicate piano of Eleanor Brand, the electronic dreams of Raymond Scott of them had, in some quiet way, paved the road to this moment. Their purpose-built melodies had evolved into something far grander, a universal language of calm. If you close your eyes and listen now to the gentle hum of an air conditioner, to the distant echo of traffic, to a faint melody looping on your headphones, you may realize that you are hearing the same dream they began. The instruments are new, the purpose transformed, but the heart is the same. It is the human wish to bring peace through sound, to shape the silence that surrounds us. The age of ambient continues still, though it no longer feels like an era. It feels like part of life itself. It is the sound of clouds drifting over a city, of moonlight touching a window pane, of thoughts softening into rest. It is not the opposite of noise, but the completion of it. And as we drift toward the next chapter, remember this: the story of music is not just about melody or fame, it is about emotion carried through time. The ambient composers did not shout. they whispered, and somehow their whispers reached further than anyone's applause ever could. Echoes in the machine. The digital renaissance of calm by the end of the 20th century. The world was changing faster than the human mind could rest. Screens began to glow in every room. Machines spoke in clicks, hums, and beeps. The once quiet rhythms of daily life grew dense with signals and notifications, all demanding attention. Yet, even within this growing storm of sound, a gentle current remained. It was the same current that had once flowed through elevators and empty lobbies, through soft vinyl and looping tapes. Now, it began to flow through circuits, through digital code, through the invisible threads of the internet. This was the dawn of a new kind of calm, one not composed on paper, but in pixels. The digital revolution did not destroy ambient music. It revived Italiano. Computers, once cold and mechanical, became tools for serenity. They allowed artists to sculpt sound as if shaping light, endless textures, infinite loops, and evolving harmonies that could shift as naturally as weather. No longer limited by tape reels or fragile vinyl, musicians could now create worlds of tone that stretched endlessly forward, never repeating, never ending. And so, the first digital ambient artists emerged from the glow of computer screens. They were not bound by record labels or physical studios. Many worked alone, in bedrooms, lit only by monitors, their microphones pointed toward the hum of life, outside rain, tapping glass, traffic humming softly in the night, the whir of distant air. They recorded these small sounds and stretched them into eternity, transforming the ordinary into the sacred. As the internet expanded, a quiet community began to gather in the hidden corners of cyberspace. There were forums dedicated to relaxation, soundscapes, and field recordings. Anonymous usernames shared loops of wind and water. Early websites offered downloadable ambient tracks, slow, meditative pieces with names like Ocean Dream or Station Drift. There was no fame in it, no competition, only sharing, only calm. It was in these early online spaces that ambient music found its second home. Free from the constraints of time and structure, artists began experimenting with sound that responded to the listener compositions that grew or faded depending on movement, temperature, even heartbeat. The dream of Raymond Scott's living music machine had quietly come true, not in a laboratory, but in homes around the world. For many, this digital rebirth of calm was more than art. It was survival. The new century brought its own kind of noise, not the hum of machines, but the constant hum of attention. Work never truly ended. Rest was never complete, and silence became rare. People began to seek out quiet intentionally, as if rediscovering an ancient medicine. They found it in the steady pulse of ambient sound. The rise of streaming platforms made the stillness accessible to everyone. With a few clicks, listeners could summon hours of sound designed for focus, for study, for sleep. Lo-fi beats, deep focus, relaxing ambient, ocean meditation. Each playlist was a small refuge against the speed of modern life. The music no longer lived only in galleries or niche collections. It became part of the daily ritual of millions. What made this movement so remarkable was not just the sound itself, but how it echoed the intentions of those early unseen composers. Once again, music became functional, yet meaningful. A companion for quiet moments, a tool for balance. But unlike the music of the mid-century, this new generation of listeners chose their calm. It was no longer imposed upon them by hidden speakers in the ceiling. It was sought out, personalized, invited. The listener became a participant in their own piece. The line between artist and listener began to blur. Apps allowed people to build their own soundscapes. Rain mixed with piano, thunder beneath strings, a city's night layered with wind. Algorithms began to understand human rest, generating music that could adapt to time of day, to mood, even to sleep cycles. Artificial intelligence became a new kind of composer, one that could learn calm, measure heartbeat, and paint sound to fit emotion. Some called this the end of human creativity, but others saw something different. They saw a continuation of the same story that began decades before. A story of music serving humanity, not rule in Italiano. The machines were not taking the place of composers. They were extending their dream. When Brian Eno released his generative music apps, They became a perfect symbol of this new era. The music never repeated, never ended, and yet never demanded attention. It simply existed, shifting with each moment like sunlight through trees. It was music as a living system, a companion to life, not a performance within it. Even social media, with all its chaos, became a vessel for calm. Short ambient videos appeared on platforms, pairing soft music with footage of clouds, water, fire, and night. Millions of people began to use these tiny fragments of serenity to slow down, to breathe, to sleep. The same kind of sound once dismissed as boring elevator music had become a medicine for a restless world. And so, the cycle turned again. What had once been industrial sound became personal peace. The work of Harold St. James, Eleanor Brandt, and Raymond Scott lived on, not in dusty tapes or forgotten libraries, but in algorithms, apps, and playlists. Their legacy whispered through headphones and speaker systems across the world, now reimagined by digital composers who might never know their names. Yet, the essence remained the same. Calm was still an act of design. Peace was still something we built, and the quietest music still carried the loudest truth, that human beings need stillness to survive. Today, if you open your favorite app and press play on a Sleep Sounds playlist, you are taking part in this lineage. You are listening to the hum of history itself, from the mechanical reels of to the analog loops of ambient pioneers, to the soft, infinite hum of a AI-generated serenity. The tools have changed, but the mission has not. The goal is still to soothe the mind, to offer a gentle rhythm for thought, to give the heart a space to rest. In this way, the machines did not replace the composers. They became their echo. Every line of code that produces a tone is an inheritance of that early dream. That music could make life not louder, but better. The artists of the past wrote on paper and tape. The artists of today write on data and time. But both are reaching for the same horizon. A world where sound heals instead of hurries. The digital renaissance of calm is not about technology. It is about humanity rediscovering the art of listening. It is the gentle reminder that peace is not found in silence alone, but in the spaces between sounds. Those small intervals, the soft pauses, the fading echoes, are where the mind begins to rest, and perhaps that is the truest legacy of all. The music of calm has never really changed. It has only changed its form. From the piano to the tape, from the synthesizer to the circuit, from the composer's hand to the algorithm's pattern, it has always carried the same message, that beauty does not shout. It hums. It breathes. It waits. As you drift into the quiet of this night, remember that the calm you hear has traveled a long way to reach you, across decades, across wires, across the hum of a restless world. It has found its way back to your ears. The echoes in the machine are not cold. They are alive. They are history, breathing softly in digital form. The psychology of calm. Why we crave gentle sound long before science could name it. The human heart already understood the power of sound. The lullaby of a mother, the rhythm of the sea, the whisper of leaves. Each carried the same quiet promise. You are safe now. The psychology of calm begins there, in the ancient instinct that links hearing with survival. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors listened to the world not for beauty, but for warning. A sudden noise could mean danger. A steady hum meant life continued as it should. In this way, calmness has always been an act of listening. The same gentle sounds that soothed us as infants. A heartbeat, a voice, the rise and fall of breath. It still whisper to the deeper parts of our mind. When we listen to soft music or the rustle of rain, our nervous system remembers safety. It lowers its guard, slows the heart, releases tension in the muscles. The mind begins to drift. What we call relaxation is not a luxury. It is the body recognizing peace. Modern psychology has confirmed what the ancients intuited, that the human brain is built to respond to rhythm and tone. Studies of neural patterns show that slow, repetitive sounds synchronize with brain waves, guiding them toward lower frequencies associated with rest and meditation. It is as if the mind, overwhelmed by its own speed, finds a companion in steady sound, a pattern it can follow home. But there is more to it than biology. Calm sound does not only regulate the nervous system, it gives shape to thought. When music unfolds gently, without tension or climax, it offers the mind a rare space. A space where it does not have to predict, analyze, or decide. Ambient and minimalist music remove the burden of expectation. The melody does not demand that you chase it. It comes to you slowly, like fog rolling across a field. In that stillness, the mind finally learns how to rest. This is why, in times of chaos, people turn instinctively toward quiet. Wars, crises, sleepless cities. Through all of them, humans have reached for soft sound as a kind of shelter. It does not erase the noise of the world, but it teaches the body how to breathe within it. To listen to gentle sound is to practice letting go. Each fading note reminds us that impermanence can be beautiful. That peace is not the absence of sound, but harmony with it. In the early 21st century, neuroscientists began to study the psychology of calm in detail. What they found was both simple and profound. The brain's amygdala, the center of fear and alertness, grows quiet when exposed to slow, low-frequency tones. At the same time, regions associated with empathy, imagination, and memory become more active. Gentle sound, it turns out, does not only calm us, it opens us. It invites daydreaming, reflection, and emotional restoration. This may explain why so many people now use ambient sound to sleep, to study, or simply to be. It creates a buffer between the self and the storm. Like soft light in a dark room, it defines the edges of comfort. The hum of a refrigerator, the rhythm of a train, the purring of a cat, all can serve this purpose, unconsciously. We crave these sounds, not because they entertain us, but because they return us to a state of belonging. In a world that constantly shouts for attention, calm sound feels revolutionary. It does not sell. It does not persuade. It does not perform. It simply is, and within that simplicity lies its greatest power. Modern psychology often speaks of flow, the state in which a person becomes fully absorbed in what they are doing, losing all sense of time. Calm sound helps to create that state by quieting the inner noise of self-criticism and distraction. It allows the listener to dissolve into presence, into now. Interestingly, the sounds that calm us most are often those that imitate nature. The wind through trees, the rhythm of waves, the chirp of distant birds. These patterns carry what researchers call non-threatening unpredictability. They change just enough to hold attention, but never enough to cause alarm. Our ancestors evolved listening to these textures. They signal a world in balance. Artificial versions of them, from white noise machines to digital rain generators, still activate that ancient sense of equilibrium. But not all calm is found in softness. Some find peace in mechanical rhythm, the turning of a fan, the murmur of engines, the whir of electricity. These are, in a way, the lullabies of the modern age. They remind us of continuity, of systems working quietly in the background, of the safety of routine. Calmness, then, is not about silence itself. It is about trust. Trust that the world will continue without us needing to intervene. Music therapists often describe this process as auditory holding. Just as a parent's arms hold a child, a soft, stable sound holds the listener in place. It tells the mind that it does not have to run, that it can surrender. This surrender is not weakness. It is healing. For in surrender, we rediscover something sacred, the capacity to feel without fear. In the digital era, when attention is a scarce resource, calm sound also serves a deeper social purpose. It reconnects us to slowness. By choosing to listen to something without hooks or climaxes, we quietly rebel against the culture built on stimulation. It is a small act of resistance to listen, not for what is next, but for what is. Philosophers have long linked music to the state of the soul. The ancient Greeks believed that certain modes of sound could shape character, aligning emotion with virtue. In the East, meditation traditions have used bells, chants, and tones for centuries to guide the mind inward. The psychology of calm is not new. It is the rediscovery of an ancient wisdom that the modern world almost forgot. And perhaps that is why the gentle music of today feels so timeless. When you press play on a quiet soundscape or an ambient track, you are not just listening to digital art. You are listening to thousands of years of human memory, of campfires and oceans, of breath and wind, of heartbeat and voice. You are listening to your own. Even the craving for calm is not weakness or escape, it is instinct. It is the mind remembering that survival is not the same as living. It is the body long trained for danger, learning again what safety sounds like. In every soft tone, every distant hum, there's an invitation to return, to presence, to balance, to the quiet place where thought and emotion finally meet in harmony. And when the music fades, the calm does not end. It lingers in the spaces between moments, in the pauses of speech, in the hush before dawn. That is where true stillness lives, not in the absence of sound, but in the peace that grows from understanding it. So, when the world grows too loud, remember this. Calm is not something you must find outside yourself. It is already within you, waiting to be heard. The music simply helps you remember how to listen. The age of sleep, sound, science, and the new rituals of rest night, once ruled by silence, is now filled with whispers of light and sound. The hum of machines, the glow of screens, the endless pulse of information, all of it lingers where darkness once invited peace. In this restless new world, humanity has begun to search again for sleep, that ancient sanctuary. And curiously, it is sound, the very thing that once kept us awake, that now helps us find our way back to rest. The age of sleep, as some quietly call it, has become a movement. Apps and platforms stream hours of rain, waves, wind, and piano. Sleep playlists stretch across the digital horizon, each one promising renewal. We live in an age where rest has become both art and science, where falling asleep is not simply a nightly act, but a carefully guided ritual, one designed by frequencies, rhythms, and tones that speak to the most private corners of the mind. Science has joined this gentle revolution. Neuroscientists and psychologists study the pathways of rest, mapping how certain frequencies lower heart rates and trigger the release of serotonin and melatonin. What once felt like magic, the soothing power of soft sound, is now measurable, visible on glowing brain scans. When slow waves of sound meet slow waves of thought, the two begin to dance. The listener drifts, the edges of consciousness blur, and the deep, repairing state of sleep begins. It is a kind of alchemy, taking vibration and turning it into peace. The human brain, with its billions of electrical signals, is itself an instrument, and calm sound tunes it gently back into harmony. Ambient tones around 60 beats per minute, aligned with the resting heartbeat. Low drones imitate the resonance of distant thunder, giving the subconscious a sense of grounding. Soft, repetitive melodies, meanwhile, offer something even more subtle: predictability. The mind loves patterns it does not have to solve. It can finally rest, knowing what comes next. The modern rituals of sleep are no longer only about darkness. They're about rhythms, soft, sensory anchors that prepare the body for surrender. A candle burning low, the soft hum of an air purifier, the weight of a blanket pressing gently on the chest, a voice, perhaps one like this, guiding the imagination toward faraway landscapes and forgotten centuries. We do not so much fall asleep anymore as walk there, following the path of calm sound step by step. Yet, this age of sleep is also a response to its opposite, an age of anxiety. The modern world rarely stops speaking, even when we are silent. Our devices whisper to us. The rhythm of the clock has been replaced by the rhythm of notifications, and the mind, always listening, grows weary. In that exhaustion, a strange longing has returned. The longing to hear something that asks for nothing. That is where sleep, music, ambient storytelling, and soft history come in. They invite no argument, make no demand, and ask for no reaction. They simply unfold. The stories drift, the sound swells and recedes, and the listener is allowed to exist in a place without expectation. The world outside keeps spinning, but for an hour or two, time itself seems to loosen its grip. Sound therapists have a name for this. It describes how the body naturally synchronizes with external rhythms. The pulse of music, the beat of a drum, the gentle waves of tone. As the ears listen, the body listens too. heartbeat, breathing, and even temperature-adjusting kind. When the rhythm slows, the body follows. The act of listening becomes the act of resting. And so, in this strange century of endless motion, a new kind of music has risen to meet our sleeplessness. It is not written for concert halls or applause. It is written for the spaces between thought, for the late hours when the mind is too full to dream. This is the new ambient art, not just background music, but a medicine of slowness. Composers today experiment with tones designed to mimic the Earth's natural frequencies. 7.83 Hz, known as the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the planet itself. Others blend field recordings from forests, caves, and oceans, weaving soundscapes that recall the earliest lullabies of nature. Each piece becomes a kind of bridge, from the mechanical to the organic, from tension to rest, from day into night. In this way, the science of sleep is slowly becoming its poetry. The clinical language of brainwaves and REM cycles meets the human language of comfort and care. Behind every playlist and guided narration lies a universal truth, that to rest is to return. The body, after all, has never forgotten how to sleep. It has only forgotten how to slow down enough to remember. And so people across the world in apartments, dorm rooms, hospitals, and quiet countryside homes now fall asleep to the same invisible orchestra. A single frequency, a soft note, a gentle story shared through digital air. It is a kind of communion, a global breath exhaled together in the dark. Perhaps this is what the composers of elevator music once dreamed of without knowing it. That sound, when made humble, can guide the mind toward stillness. That music need not demand attention to have meaning. That rest, in its truest form, is not the absence of life, but its gentlest rhythm. Even the act of listening becomes ritual, a candle in sound. The listener sets their phone aside, dimming its screen. They adjust their pillow, settle their breathing, and press play. A wave of tone rises, soft and slow, like fog rolling across a silent bay. Words drift into the air, maybe of history, or memory, or forgotten places. And the listener begins to sink beneath them, like a stone into deep water. Somewhere between waking and dreaming, time becomes fluid. The story may continue, but the mind has already stepped away, floating through half-remembered images. A quiet lobby filled with sunlight, a long hallway lined with framed photographs, the echo of music that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. In that gentle blur, something ancient stirs the old instinct that says, "You are safe, you may rest now." This, perhaps, is the true legacy of ambient sound. Not its history, or its composers, or even its technology, but the way it brings us home to stillness. In the end, every soft tone, every lingering echo, is a small act of kindness. It tells the weary mind that sleep is not a failure of productivity, but the most human act of all. To sleep is to trust. To listen is to heal. And as the world outside hums with its endless noise, the quiet listener closes their eyes. The hum of music folds into breath. The past and present dissolve into one calm, endless now. Night deepens, the mind drifts, and once more sound becomes silence. Silence, the final note. Every story must end somewhere. Every sound, too. Yet when it comes to the history of music, few endings are as quiet as this one. For behind every melody, every chord, every drifting note of calm sound, there lies something even more powerful. Silence. It waits patiently, between tones and beneath them, shaping the music we hear and the peace we feel. Tonight, as we reach the close of this journey, we listen not for what remains, but for what has been there all along. Silence is older than music. It is older than words, older even than memory. Before the first drum beat, there was breath. Before the first song, there was the hush of the night wind, the stillness of stars across an unbroken sky. To the ancients, silence was not emptiness, but presence, the space in which the sacred could be felt. The Greeks called it ησυχία, a quietude of the spirit. In the East, silence was the teacher behind every sound, the space where truth revealed itself without voice. In the modern world, we often think of silence as the absence of something, as if quiet were a gap to be filled. But to musicians, philosophers, and dreamers, silence is the canvas. Without it, no sound could exist. The gentle tone of a piano, the echo of a voice, the hum of an elevator melody. All these draw meaning from the pauses that cradle them. Music, in its essence, is a conversation between noise and nothingness. And within that conversation, calm is born. Throughout this story, we have followed the journey of ambient sound from its humble origins in the hum of elevators and lobbies to the artful stillness of modern sleep music. Yet every composer we met, from the anonymous architects of Musak to the pioneers of the ambient age, shared a common understanding that sound means nothing without space. Each note needs room to breathe, to fade, to dissolve into something larger than itself. Brian Eno once described ambient music as ignorable as it is. Interesting, what he meant was that its true strength lies in humility, willingness to coexist with silence rather than replace it. This is the paradox of calm sound. It fills the air without intruding. It exists without insisting. It gives you the feeling of company without the weight of attention. In that gentle balance, listeners discover the quiet between thoughts, the still point between waking and dreaming. Silence, then, is not the opposite of sound. It is the resting place of sound, the place where vibrations fall, still, and meaning settles like dust in sunlight. Neuroscientists who study brain patterns during meditation have noticed something remarkable and true. The brain does not shut down. It becomes more aware. The mind, freed from the constant input of words and noise, begins to perceive subtler rhythms, the pulse of breath, the faint murmur of blood, the tiny symphony of the body simply existing. Silence turns the listener inward. For this reason, the art of calm sound is really the art of returning, of guiding the listener gently back toward the soundless place from which music first arose. The great composers of mood knew this. Their melodies, tuk simple, always ended softly, as if the music were bowing before something greater. Even the hum of a labatoon seemed to whisper its final notes into stillness, leaving behind a faint glow of peace. In our own lives, silence is harder to find. The world has grown restless, layered with the endless static of modern living. Notifications, engines, voices, machines. Yet deep inside, we still crave that ancient quiet. We crave the kind of silence that isn't just around us, but within us, the kind that steadies thought and opens space for wonder. That is why the modern listener has rediscovered sleep stories, ambient sound, and slow histories like this one. They are not escapes from the world, but bridges back to it, invitations to rediscover the calm that was never lost, only drowned out. In a sense, each of these stories is a long exhale, a reminder that time moves more gently when we allow it to. Silence teaches patience. It asks nothing of us except to be present. It is the great equalizer of sound, where the loud and the soft dissolve together. In silence, we hear what was always waiting. Our own heartbeat, our own breath, the fragile rhythm of being alive. Imagine, for a moment, the final note of a song fading into the dark. It does not end abruptly. It lingers, trembles, and disappears. That last vibration is the sound of surrender, the music accepting its place within the silence it once resisted. The same happens in life. We move, we create, we strive. But at the end of every journey, there is a pause, a quiet beyond words, and in that pause, we finally understand. Silence is not the end of sound. It is the beginning of listening. It is where the mind hears what the ears cannot. Peace, memory, belonging. Every gentle story told in the night, every ambient melody, every whispered note, all of them are small offerings to silence, shaping it into comfort. Perhaps that is why the most beautiful part of a song is often the moment just after it ends. The air feels charged, like the echo of something sacred. The listener for a heartbeat does not wish to move. That stillness is the purest form of music, one that belongs to both sound and silence alike. In the quiet that follows, you may notice how the world itself becomes a kind of orchestra. The soft tick of a clock, the distant sigh of wind, the pulse within your own chest. They all blend together, forming a wordless lullaby that has played since the beginning of time. And as you lie there, listening, perhaps you realize that calm sound was never meant to distract you from silence, but to lead you gently toward it. The music fades, but the peace remains. That is the secret of all ambient art. It does not end where the track stops. It continues, quietly, in you. So now, as this story reaches its close, allow the silence to take its place. Let it unfold softly around you, like a warm, invisible blanket. Breathe in the stillness. Feel the rhythm of your body slowing to match it. The history of sound has carried you here, from the hum of elevators to the whisper of dreams, and all that remains is quiet. In this final pause, remember, silence is not empty. It is full of meaning, of rest, of gentle possibility. It is the sound beneath sound, the history beneath history. It is where all stories sleep. And as you drift now, between waking and rest, let the silence carry you steady, timeless, infinite. The music is ended, but the peace continues. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams be as quiet as the world before the first sound. And so ends our quiet journey through the hidden history of elevator music. The art that turned background sound into an atmosphere of peace. May these forgotten melodies remind you that even in the smallest sounds, there can be beauty. And even in silence, there can be rest. If this story helped you drift toward.com, please subscribe to Go to Sleep Historian, where every night we rediscover the gentle side of history, one peaceful tale at a time. Until we meet again, sleep softly, dream deeply, and may the quiet music of the world stay with you through the night.